by AS16, we were picking a name. Berengaria had started a newsletter, and we had our first official captaincy and flank squad fighting for Tangi. The name picking process was kind of interesting compared to how things were done later. We spent a lot of time on that. We met one event, discussed the fact that we probably should pick a name, went back to our groups, and for the next 6 months encouraged them to find names to present to the council 6 months later. And we did just that. We had 5 or 6, 7 or 8 really good names to choose from. I particularly like Atuach Mor, which means the Great Land in Gaelic, but most people couldn't pronounce it. That came from our herald, of course. Kielsen had found Oertha somewhere. By the time we actually approved that name, he couldn't find the documentation anymore. It would never pass now.
It's supposed to be Alaska Airlines magazine.
Yes, yes. Well, most of the Oertha names would not pass now.
No.
Oertha was undocumentable. Wintersgate was not standard nomenclature. We could have said the same thing, but we would have had to have said it in proper ways. And Ascalia is an anagram of Alyeska, so a made-up name. So things were much easier back then. So we came back with the names. We had a fight in the council about how many names to present back to the populace. There was a strong contingent for the North. There was a strong contingent for anything else but. And we didn't know, the battle was whether or not to present the North and 2 of the other alternatives to the populace at large, or whether to just present the North and the most popular other name. I won, and we only presented 2. Being a political animal, I could see that one coming miles away, because the non-North names were split. And given the inclinations of the people at the time, either or, they really did want either non-North or North. The only way to really make it a fair ballot was not to have the vote split on a political measure. So that's what we ended up. We ended up bringing back Oertha and the North. There was advertisements and newsletters and politicking for and con. Wow. And we polled our populaces and brought the results back in Oertha won. And then of course we had to present it at that, somewhere around that time. Ariana Silkenfire sponsored a competition for ideas for devices, and then nothing came of that for a long time. But that was the general way the Council of the North worked. We'd come up with an idea, we'd bring it back to the groups to see if they approved or not, or had other suggestions, and then we'd go back to the Council of the North and go from there. So that we tried to keep everybody completely involved at all levels. They could ignore it if they wanted to, but we weren't not taking it back to them. Just for grins and giggles, October 16 was the very large Wintersgate Michaelmas. It was the first time we decided to try a 3-course feast, and it mushroomed from the 30 people we probably thought we would feed to over 100. The college folks, who were Berengaria and Wolf Weiss and Hirsch von Henford and Pira and Fanshin, and I don't remember who else, decided that they would take advantage of monies available through the university and brought up 3 instructors. Hi. Who were Merwin Delaney's, who was the principal scribe at the time. That was Wolf's idea because he was an illuminator. He actually did the first petition for us, the province petition. And Joffrey de Grippenholm paid his own way up and did a fighting class. And then we had Mistress K to come up, who was the Arts and Sciences Minister. Back in those days, they were combined. No, she was Sciences Minister. Back in those days, they were separated. Yeah. Separated, anyhow, they were separated at the time. So at that point, it meant a whole bunch of Ascalians came up. And of course, decided to blizzard that day. The cooks were late, the food was late. It was way more food than we needed, but we all had a really good time. There's various things that started on that particular one. The Montfort Quartet began that day. Any number but 4, and they have to sing badly, which is a sight to hear when you realize that half of the Montfort Quartet at any given time was in the Madrigal Singers group. So Katie was not impressed. We thought it was funny. Around around the summer of 17, the first petition to become a principality arose. The politics between Scalia and Winter's Gate and the Trolls and Silverguard were not very good at that point, and we ended up with two petitions. One saying we want to be a principality, and the other one saying we're not ready. They both managed to make it down to Juneau that summer where Radnor visited. I wasn't there, but I heard the story. Both petitions were presented to him in court, and Radnor at first accepted both of them, then handed them back and said, I will accept no petition until there is only one. What a smart man. Radnor, among several other kings, James Greyhelm, William the Lucky, and Jade are probably the people who were the most familiar with Oerthan politics over the years. So that squashed that particular effort for a while. Later that summer was the first Chicken Wars, for those of you who are familiar with the Chicken Wars. The first one was because Hirschwan Henford had registered his name before Shireen de Contract managed to register the name of her household, which was Leslie Henford, and they wouldn't let her until she changed the spelling because of Hirsch's name. So they had a war about it. Not that they were going to sway the heralds one way or the other, but they had a war. We and the Trolls, of course, were against the Ascalians. They had brought up, Shireen had brought up Radnor and William the Lucky and a couple other fighters. I don't remember who they were. I only remember that we only won one of the fighting battles, no, two. The first one because the Trolls sneaked in from the side through the woods and came up behind the rest of the Ascalians. Shireen immediately decided that the sides were obviously not balanced, therefore they had to take people back. But it was fun anyhow.
The story about the
Oh, the one-on-one?
they had a couple of
It got down to at one point when William the Lucky was the last one on our side, and he challenged, will one good fighter come forward? And he managed, and Jade had been legged, so he wasn't there. I mean, Radnor had been legged, so he wasn't there, and William proceeded to waltz through the rest of them. But they didn't. The next battle, I think Radnor was left, and he said the same thing, and the Trolls mobbed him. It was a war after all, not an honor tourney. They weren't taking that at all. It was kind of fun watching that kind of stuff going on. But that led to the annual wars for a while after that, just for the fun of it. In January of 17, a ton of us went down to 12th Night. Paul and Bellatrix and Rowena were stepping down, and we had already been made an informal group. West Kingdom doesn't have territories and informal groups per se, but we had sort of a slate of officers who were major deputies to the kingdom officers. And I didn't know what was going on until I went to the event, although I was staying with Hilario Serendip, who was the kingdom seneschal. Looking back then, I heard some very suspicious calls. I get to the event, and Shireen marches up to me and says, "Where's the petition?" And I'm going to say, "What petition?" Being very sensitive to the subject of petitions. And someone was supposed to have delivered a petition to me. Oh well, they didn't do it, and it didn't make it. However, we did whip one out there because we were told that that we were going to ask for permission to eventually form a principality, not ask for permission to become a principality. That's what we were told anyhow. When we go up in court behind the spokesperson for this particular thing, we present the petition for it to be asked for permission to form a principality sometime in the future. We discover that it had already been settled, and they made us a crown principality. Needless to say, myself and a few others were not happy about this. Not partly because no one knew what a crown principality was. There hadn't been one in the kingdom, I don't know how long. I'd never heard of one.